Still awaiting two of our panel members who are with the secretary, so we will get started. Let me introduce to you the panel that we do have, a distinguished panel. Each of you will have seen the packet with their credentials, but let me just briefly... We're talking to Lex again. So let me start off. Dave Johnson, Special Agent, San Francisco Division, FBI. Many years in the agency. Victoria Espinal is not with us. Elena Kvochko, Head of Global Information Security Strategy at Barclays Bank. Brian Kelly, CSO, Rackspace, responsible for safety, security of all facilities in the organization, previously various branches of the US government. Nicole Egan, CEO of Darktrace, which provides cybersecurity using some new technology surrounding immune system technology modeled on humans. I'm Michael Patsalos-Fox. I'm Chief Executive of Stroz Friedberg, a cybersecurity digital forensics organization. Much has been written, and I want to start off with David. I guess the first question to you, since you're in law enforcement, is are the good guys winning or the bad guys winning?
Well, I'd love to say that the good guys are winning, and maybe that should be the sort of the premise that we start with, but it's really a hard question to answer accurately. I think it's fair to say that primarily the federal government is doing everything it can to try and address the issue, spending a lot of time working with our private sector counterparts to share information and put folks on the bad guys. But it's really a hard question to answer. Either way, yes or no.
So undecided, on balance.
Yeah.
Not willing to give a position. Who's winning?
Was that to me?
Yeah. Just you're on balance.
Yeah. So I'm balanced because I would say that I don't have a good answer to the question, but I would say that we are holding our own.
Okay.
All right.
Brian, you're out there, trying to secure a lot of infrastructure and facilities. How do you see it?
Yeah, but I'm going to start with a disclaimer that I'm actually quite optimistic about the progress that we are and we can continue to make in security. But I'll also admit we've got a long way to go. I guess how I would come down on that question, I would probably say today the bad guys have a bit of an upper hand still, despite our efforts. We often say that of course I worry about protecting a large corporate infrastructure, and I've got to worry about thousands of exposures and issues, and it's constantly changing. And I often think about my adversary, and I think, man, he just needs to know one, right? He just has to have the one exposure that he can go ahead and exploit, and I've got to worry about 50,000 of them. I don't know which one he's going to go after. So I think that's our challenge today. The last group, the Commerce Group, we talked about changes we're making in the legal framework, the relationship we have with law enforcement, what the private sector is developing from technology. So I'm seeing rapid progress, but I have to admit I still lose sleep at night with the bad guy knowing that one exposure that I've either missed or I haven't really secured well enough.
So Elena, just if you look at this from a corporate perspective, Brian talked about the challenges of to keep him awake at night. How does a company, how does a big bank, which is pretty sophisticated, think about the way it sequences, prioritizes, how much it spends on protecting itself, right? Because you can also bring an organization to a standstill if you try hard enough trying to secure it.
Right. Well, you're right, Michael. Actually, security and privacy is a fundamental part of what a bank sells, because fundamentally, a bank sells trust. Barclays has recently celebrated its 325th anniversary and became actually much older than the United States. And the fundamental for this, the fundamental for our business has always been customer trust. So without security and without privacy, you can no longer have it. On the other hand, it becomes very obvious right now for the industry that a physical presence of a bank is no longer a strong competitive advantage. Therefore, therefore the industry is moving all of their services and offerings online. So on the one hand, customers do want to use all kinds of online channels, mobile channels. They expect their bank to know their preferences. But on the other hand, security teams like us want to put additional layers on those digital offerings. So the challenge is, how do we strike the balance, and how do we offer products that have both security and convenience, security and privacy, and are very convenient and easy to use.
I'm just wondering if I think about this, maybe anybody in the panel could address this, and maybe Nicole, you go first. You know, a lot of new age software companies are built with an aim, a primary objective of getting to market very quickly. And you know, you as an investor have seen this, I'm sure, over the years. And maybe security isn't always baked in to what they do from day one, leaving exposures and vulnerabilities. Do you think that a lot of what goes on and a lot of the software that's coming out of the Valley particularly is really secure in today's terms?
Well, I think what we've been looking at is a different approach has to emerge. You know, we've heard that right now it is, you know, tough going, and I think by using technology, which, you know, Silicon Valley is very well known for, if you built in every single piece of software and in our networks, whether it be Internet of Things, you know, operational technology, or corporate networks, this idea of having it have more awareness of how it normally needs to behave, and therefore, when there are anomalies, automatically being able to detect those. So, you know, that's the, you know, kind of fundamental shift that we're seeing right now is, rather than blocking known bad, which is a lot of the approaches right now, maybe it's more about understanding what's normal and then detecting what's abnormal and then investigating those for your vulnerabilities.
I understand a lot of the detection systems, though, throw out a huge number of false positives. How do we deal with all that?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting is, so machine learning is one of the areas that we're seeing as an emerging new technology for cyber defense. And I think it's a great practical application of machine learning. One of the things, though, that we do see with it is there's different approaches. And so where you hear false positives very often is where people are trying to model. So they're building models environments. So for instance, in Barclays' case, it would be like building a model of a big global bank. Well, Barclays' network infrastructure is entirely different than other global banks. So you're going to end up with false positives if you take that modeling type approach. If you take an approach of machine learning, actually seeing what's going on by analyzing network traffic or user device behavior, then you reduce your false positives because everything that you're detecting is actually happening.
Gotcha. Dave, you I'm sure have seen what my firm sees, which is in a lot of big breaches. Most of the companies that are involved are armed to the teeth with software and hardware and appliances and firewall detection and endpoint detection, yet it still happens. And it quite often happens because of human beings. How do we account for the human equation in all this and the business processes that lead people to do things that are not secure?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different sort of pieces to that question. So clearly, I think in terms of having a response plan in place, that obviously is a key part to any reaction to a breach. You've got to have the right people on that team. You've got to have your employees trained and understand what a lot of the vulnerabilities are to try and take that piece out of the equation. You've got to have good relationships between the security departments and the C-suite folks, and you've also got to have really good, solid, firm relationships between the company and federal law enforcement to effectively respond to those breaches as quickly as possible and try and mitigate them.
So you're essentially saying it will happen, but you've just got to be resilient.
Absolutely. It will happen. You've got to have a plan in place. You've got to exercise that plan and know how to respond and deal with those particular risks.
A couple of latecomers, Rowan from Cisco, who has been involved in the past with security firms, software firms, but is involved in collaboration and Internet of Things. And then, of course, we have Victoria, who is coming to us from the BSA, the Software Alliance, and spent many years in the White House. And so welcome. We appreciate you being here. Ron, can I just put you on the spot? The Internet of Things is supposed to be paradise for hackers. I mean, literally paradise. Exponential points of vulnerability, exponential points of entry into all kinds of things, you know.
Yeah.
How are we going to possibly deal with that when we're barely dealing with the intrusions that take place now?
It's probably one of the biggest challenges I think we have in the Internet of Things. You know, you've got thing makers on one side of this who are racing as fast as they can to connect all of those things. And then you've got on the other side a whole legion of hackers who have grown up with PCs and Windows machines and phones to go after. So now we're sort of seeing all of that 5 to 10x increase or 100x increase in the number of the attack surface basically is going to just exponentially increase. And the biggest challenge we have today is we're already struggling to secure the existing infrastructure, the existing things that are connected, phones and computers. And we can sort of say with a high degree of certainty that most companies or all companies are already penetrated. And the challenge you have when you go to IoT is not only that there are more things, the talent is not necessarily there in companies, the thing makers, to secure them, A. B, they're going to be around for a lot longer. I just finished rewiring my house with connected lighting. And I can guarantee you, I'm not going to pull those things out anytime soon. And whereas, I'm used to updating, Patch Tuesday on my laptop, that's not something that my lighting manufacturer is necessarily qualified to do. They don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the talent, and all those other kinds of things. So we are entering into a period here that I think is going to be very frightening for think Stuxnet writ large, really, because that was just a taste of what could happen if we're not thoughtful about how we roll these things out.
One of the questions we were just dealing with before you came in was the issue of vulnerability associated with software that's been written in a hurry. And as we know, speed is the ultimate competitive weapon. There's a lot of people writing roughly the same sorts of software to get to market. They may take some shortcuts. How do you feel about the vulnerabilities behind those?
I think a lot of folks sort of have taken the approach in the Valley or in the tech industry of write the first version and see if you can get to scale. Don't spend all the extra money to make it hyper secure out of the gate, because why would you do that if you don't actually hit product market fit? The challenge, and that may be okay when you can quickly update these things over the air. When you get into the Internet of Things where these devices are going to sit around for a long time, you can't really do that. And it's probably 50%. My experience has been it's 50% more expensive to build something up front to be secure out of the gate, and it's a lot slower. It's probably 2 times slower in terms of just getting it right. So think about a company that's trying to get their product connected, a thing maker, and they're not even really sure whether there's a product for this thing yet or not. Why are they going to spend a whole bunch of extra money and time on security? We can just maybe fix that later. The challenge is you can't fix it later because now it's baked in. It's a fire alarm on the ceiling somewhere that nobody's going to ever touch. So that's the challenge and the quandary that we have, really.
Kind of an apocalyptic vision. Brian?
Yeah, I was just going to comment because I just experienced a couple months ago an issue, and I think it speaks to probably overall the state of software development in the country, right? We do have this tendency, I think, to just append new to old, and the experience I had was with a software vulnerability called Venom that affected the cloud industry. But there was a week or two where it was a big deal, right? Because you could demonstrate you could crash a hypervisor, and of course everybody's looking for that that instance to say, look, we told you cloud wasn't secure. Now, granted, it was a hypothetical attack, yet it was still a good piece of research. But the issue was code that they needed to put in place to be able to interface with a floppy drive. Who uses floppy drives anymore? But they still, the code was there, so they had to write this interface just so it was complete. Yet it was that little piece of code to interface to a floppy disk drive that actually caused the vulnerability. So, there is an element of we've got to go back and kind of look at what software baseline we're using, and in some cases probably need to just shoot it. and start fresh. In other cases, due to cost constraints and speed to market, yeah, we probably, we'll just build on existing software, but I think we've got to go back and kind of take a look at, are there serious holes in that software before we just perpetuate that, particularly within another industry sector like IoT.
As I understand it, some of the least secure software is software that was written 30 years ago that still sits behind a lot of very big systems.
That's exactly
that we all use, presumably airlines, banks, financial institutions, and they're all being remediated right now. Victoria, I wonder if you would comment on the whole, public-private sharing encryption debate in respect of software vendors and the government wanting to reach in and get access to things that might threaten people's liberties.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Let me step back for a moment because I was listening to the conversation, and it's clear that there's a significant and obvious security threat from all the increased connectivity, and we feel like we live in a connected world now, and that is nothing compared to where we're going to be 5 or 10 years from now. Right. And one of the things that comes out of that, or will come out of it even more that already has, is the sort of exponential increase in data and what that is going to mean for us as a world. And there are all sorts of different ways that you can think about that, right? So there's been a lot of conversation already about the economic gains from data, productivity and efficiency gains that businesses will see. There is a lot that we're already seeing in terms of societal impacts. So healthcare, I think, is an obvious area where we're already seeing some significant shifts in medical research and advances, and clearly that is something we're going to be seeing even more of. One of the interesting issues that comes out of that is the balance between privacy and security, and law enforcement having the ability to do their job, which is an incredibly important job of protecting the citizens of their country or citizens around the world, and balancing that with the need for consumer privacy, and how do we as the United States and how do we as the world find the right balance there. You can also look at it as a trade issue, and if there's interest, I'd love to talk a little bit about a particular trade issue we're having with data right now, since the European Court of Justice came out with a decision just a few weeks ago that invalidated a mechanism that nearly 5,000 American companies have been relying on for 15 years in order to move data back and forth from the United States to Europe. But going back to the question you asked me, the sort of the balance between privacy and security, and we spend a lot of time thinking about that. Our companies care very much about the mission of law enforcement. Many of them not only work with law enforcement, but even sort of beyond partnerships with law enforcement are doing a lot internally to try to keep the internet as safe and secure as it can be. So it's a big concern. On the other hand, our companies take consumer privacy very seriously, and we are keenly aware of the fact that if consumers don't trust technology, they won't use technology, and that would be a significant downside for all of us.
And you represent both large and small software institutions,
yes,
right?
we are the global voice of software. So we represent big companies, smaller companies, companies based in the United States, companies based around the world, the software industry as a whole. And you asked about encryption specifically. I think our companies unanimously would say that they have concerns about government mandating backdoors to encryption. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone who's following the issue that we would have a concern about that. And one of the reasons that we have a concern about that is because we are worried that backdoors, no matter how they are designed, inevitably are going to undermine network security, and the kinds of security concerns that we already face will be increased. A second reason that we have concerns about it is because it is very difficult and it is politically impossible to design a system where you have backdoors to encryption for one segment of law enforcement and not open that up to law enforcement around the world. And I think we have real concerns about the international precedents of backdoors to encryption. So it's been in discussions ongoing in many, many countries, not just the United States. And I think it's because governments are, legitimately and in good faith, many of them, struggling with what the right balance is, what the right balance between protection of citizens and national security and protection of privacy is. I guess the last thing that I would say, I have many more things I could say on this, but the last thing I'll say at the moment is, and this may be because of my own personal background as a trade negotiator for the United States, I think it's really important that whatever, as our administration is engaged right now in an intense debate here in the United States about what the right balance is, that we not forget that whatever we do in the United States will be an example, for better or for worse, for other countries around the world. And I think it's really important that the United States try to engage other countries in this discussion as well. This is very ambitious, I realize it, but it would be ideal to try to have some sort of international consensus about what the right balance on these issues are. And I absolutely recognize that not every country is going to come to the table, but I think there are some countries that have enough of a, I think there are some countries where it would be productive to have that conversation. So I would encourage and urge the United States not just to think about it internally, but also be talking to key allies around the world.
David, I wonder if you would comment on this issue. I mean, it's some ways a politically charged issue. It's also an issue that I've heard, people ex-NSA, ex-CIA leaders talk about with passion. Talk to us about how you and your institution think about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It seems to be a very polarizing issue, one that's is not easily answered. So it is all about balance, trying to strike that balance, and that's not an easy thing to do. I think from a law enforcement perspective, in terms of the FBI and other law enforcement agencies, there have been, there will be, there is going to be occasions where we need to access to certain data or certain information to not only resolve crimes, but also prevent them from occurring. And it's very frustrating for us not to be able to have access to that information when we have the appropriate legal process to get that information. That's generally something that has not been a terrible issue for us over time. So if we go to court, get a judge to sign a court order, and then we provide that on a particular provider, it is very helpful for us to have that information, particularly in a kidnapping matter or in a variety of other cases. So it's very frustrating for us not to have that, the ability to get that information. To my knowledge, we don't have a particular case or instance where we have gotten the court order and gone to a particular provider or carrier and asked for the information, not gotten it, and something bad has happened. But I think it's fair to say that at some point in time that will happen. And I'm not sure that's exactly the place that we want to be in terms of a country. So I understand that it's a very complicated issue. It's going to take a lot of conversations, engagement with other partners as well. But I don't think we're close to a solution. I think, as the director of the FBI, Director Comey says, it's something that needs to be talked about and talked a lot about, and conversations need to be had.
Elena, do you have a point of view?
Yeah, so I think from the corporate perspective, for us, it's all about reducing the time between detection and protection. And it's not, we do recognize that no one is irresistible to cyber threats. So it's all about reducing that time. And, you asked earlier how a large corporation could prioritize investments. So what we do is we also rely on the reports from the Red Team, internal Red Team, for instance, and then see what are our controls, what are our assets, and what are the threats.
And you work with the authorities to do these?
Yes, so we recently launched and signed an MOU agreement with Interpol and Europol, with law enforcement agencies. So that's definitely a big priority as well. And then I think also for big drivers of the industry, such as the banks, it's no longer simply about combining all the different tools and applying them to our infrastructure, but it's also about innovating and investing in R&D and looking at those next generation technologies that may actually shift the course.
And what are some of those next generation technologies? I do want to ask you, but also want to ask Nicole as well. Go ahead, yeah.
Actually last year, we launched the whole program, Barclays Accelerator, where we invite startup founders and entrepreneurs to work closely with Barclays team and experts to design those technologies. In the security space, we partner with companies that design passwordless authentication or blockchain security, or training for security staff and for employees, or encryption companies. So basically, it's a whole range of companies that we feel like we should be investing in those areas, and then we try to support and partner them with.
And Barclays actually invests in those as equity partners, or is it users as a customer?
Not as equity partners, but we'll run a proof of concepts with them and potentially sign deals with them if they're successful.
Cool. I wonder if you could explain a little bit. I don't think many people know about your business, and so it's a small company, and it's got kind of an interesting background.
Yeah, so Darktrace was founded about 2 years ago, and it was founded by folks from the intelligence community, specifically from GCHQ and MI5. And we combined that group combined with mathematicians and machine learning experts from the University of Cambridge. It really started by taking a different approach to the problem. And we saw that a lot of the legacy approaches around building walls around the outside of networks were not succeeding. I mean, it's good best practice, but the reality is if an attacker wanted to get into a network, we found that within 48 to 72 hours, they could pretty much get into any network.
Yeah.
So we took an approach instead to really shine a bright light inside the network and actually use this advanced machine learning together with over 100 mathematical algorithms to baseline normal and then detect abnormal behavior, and then provide actually an investigation as well as a forensics ability. So now we've deployed that in well over 100 different customers around the world, and we've had tremendous success. And I think what's interesting is throughout this conference, I've heard a lot of talk around algorithms, and we heard the person from DARPA this morning talk about man and machine. And I think that combination of this machine learning, these algorithms, is going to be what it takes, because the reality is the sophistication of the attackers, be it nation states, hacktivists, or organized cyber criminals, has really is quite advanced. So if you don't use these more advanced techniques, I don't think we're going to see that shift change. So that's, I think it comes down to embracing technology as part of the solution and being willing to be on the forefront of some of these advanced approaches.
That's very interesting, because certainly some of our clients have a number of threat intel feeds, and now they have to write programs to determine which of the intel feeds is the one they should listen to. And it's just like one more nightmare on top of a dozen other nightmares. Ron, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the last thing you said really resonates around using technology and thinking about the problem differently. So if you go back to the backdoor issue as one example, if you sort of roll the clock back to a world where, let's say you had your files on your computer in your home, and in that world, if the FBI or a law enforcement agency needed to have access, they could get a subpoena and go access them by breaking in, getting into your house and taking your hard drive, taking your computer. Now we're living in a world where that data has been moved to the cloud, and you have to go to one place to get that information. And we actually, and then that really becomes an issue when you're talking about cross-border. And I have a sort of a profound belief in the idea that ultimately the owner of the data should be in control of that data. And I think the industry is lining up on different sides of this depending on who you are. If you're a Google who gets to monetize that data in different ways, you may have a different view. My view is that there's an alternative outcome possible, which is I'd like to be able to store my data in the cloud as a customer, whether it's a consumer or a business entity, but have that data be encrypted at rest where I have the keys. And so that's something that we've been working on in our company, is this alternative outcome, which we think still allows for law enforcement to get the job done when necessary. You can still, so if I'm again, back to my house example, I still have my files, but now I have the keys that I own, and the data is in the cloud. Law enforcement still has the ability to subpoena me to get my keys to then access my data. And then get the data from the cloud vendor. So I think there are, it's ending up being this sort of polarized issue about backdoors or not. That's not, there are alternative answers that are on the horizon where we can use technology to solve this problem in a different way, in a way that's frankly more empowering to consumers and businesses, and that also may allow us to get around some of the very thorny cross-country legislature issues that none of these sort of outcomes look particularly positive for.
I have a question, Victoria. Why do you think after 15 years the safe harbor thing blew up the way it did?
Well, I would love to answer that, but actually, if I could just build on what Rowan said, because I think the cross-country, cross-border data, there's a lot of interesting, I think, legal and policy issues that come out of that, and it's because, you know, kind of understandably, the laws of the United States or other countries around the world are not written for a world in which data is stored in so many different places. And so one of the things that you know, putting aside the encryption issue for a moment, I think one of the other challenges that we have right now is we live in a world where, you know, a company may hold data on behalf of a customer, but where they hold that data may not be the same place that that particular company is headquartered. And there's not, in our view right now, there's not a clear legal framework for how, if law enforcement has a legitimate need to get that information, what is the process that they go through in order to get information held by a company, but perhaps held on the other side of the world. There is a sort of understood legal process for how you do that in the physical world, but there's not, at least in our opinion, there's not a clear way for how you do that in the digital world. And that's not a good situation for anyone. That's not a good situation for companies who aren't sure what to comply with, or maybe in a position where they're having to comply with conflicting things. It's not a good thing for customers who aren't sure, again, exactly what the rules are around their data. It's not a good thing for law enforcement who has a need to be able to get that information as quickly as possible. So I think for the sake of everyone, we need to figure out, and again, we need to do it in a way that has some international consensus among at least a group of countries, what the right rules are for how law enforcement gets information that is stored overseas. There are processes that exist now. They are, you know, clunky. They could be improved. They probably should be improved. We are very much supportive of the Department of Justice having more money to try to improve some of those processes and have more people to try to man them. But, you know, it's my view that while those processes could be improved, they're never going to be quick enough for what law enforcement needs in this world, or at least not in all circumstances. And so in addition to fixing and streamlining and boosting some of the processes we have now, I think we need to look at whether or not there's some new international agreement or new framework we need for law enforcement of various countries accessing information that may be held in various places around the world.
It still involves fax machines, as far as I'm aware, a lot of that process.
There is definitely some streamlining that could happen. But even if we get that done, I think there's probably more that we need on top of that.
Yeah. And you didn't answer my other question, which is why did it blow up?
So, you know, the US-EU Safe Harbor was negotiated 15 years ago. A lot has changed in the last 15 years. The Safe Harbor was invalidated on October 6th when the European Court of Justice issued an opinion that came out of a challenge that had been raised by a man named Max Schrems as to how his particular data was being treated by Facebook. But I think, you know, stepping back from the specifics of that case, I think the fact that it was invalidated illuminates some of the tension that we're seeing around the world in terms of what the right privacy standards are. There's a lot of discussion, at least in my world, about the differences between how Europeans and Americans view privacy. My own view is that Europeans and Americans are actually not as far apart as some would say. You know, I think Europeans care deeply about privacy. I think Americans care deeply about privacy too. It is enshrined in our Constitution. We have a long history of protecting privacy in the United States. So I think, you know, at a fundamental level, I think we both care deeply about privacy. That said, the European Court of Justice sort of having the ability to come in and, you know, in a day, invalidate a mechanism that nearly 5,000 companies have been relying on is concerning. And part of the reason that happened is because we live in a world right now where we don't have global trade rules for how data should be used. There is no WTO agreement on how data should move back and forth across borders. There is no international consensus on that. And so going back to the safe harbor, you know, I think specifically looking at the U.S.-European citizen situation that we face, clearly the United States and Europe need to quickly come to a new agreement. And I think the United States is very keen to do that, and I hope the European Commission is as well.
Are you optimistic or not?
I am optimistic that they will come to a short-term resolution, that they will be able to negotiate a Safe Harbor 2.0 in the next few months. I am optimistic about that. What I'm not optimistic about is that Safe Harbor 2.0 will be a long-term solution. So I think as important it is that there be focus on trying to come to a Safe Harbor 2.0 in the next few weeks, if possible, I think we also need to immediately be figuring out what the long-term solution to that is going to be. And I think it's very difficult to do that unless we have some sort of international consensus on what the baseline rules for data moving back and forth across national borders should be.
Okay. I want to refocus this back down to the poor individual that's responsible in some corporation for safeguarding the assets of that corporation and helping the board of that company meet its fiduciary obligations, its duty of care. How on earth do you start to think about what you do when you get out of bed in the morning? What do you do first, second, third? How do you convince a board of directors, senior management that you're on top of it? How do you deliver, and how do people know you've delivered so they feel confident in what you're up to?
Yeah. So I've been in my current role for 1 year now, and kind of my priorities in that first year, and it gets right to your question. My first priority was to make sure that we were absolutely the best we could be in our ability to detect and respond, to the point that was made earlier. The old model about prevent, detect, respond, educate, and govern. I used that simple model the first day I was with the board, and then I said, from this day forward, you'll never hear me use the word prevent, because you can't prevent this stuff. Anyone that tells you they can doesn't understand this business.
How often are you in front of your board?
I've been 6 times in 12 months.
So every board meeting, in effect.
And more, yeah.
And more.
Yeah, I've had a couple of special meetings pulled aside, but it'll probably. honestly, I know what's kind of being recommended today is quarterly. So in my case, it'll be probably twice. 2 quarters in front of the actual full board and 2 quarters in front of the audit committee, which is actually acting on behalf of the board. So I'll be in front of them at least 4 times.
And presumably some of your task is educating a board. That's kind of what we find, because some boards come to us and say, we don't even know what questions to ask.
Yeah. I've seen,
other than, am I okay?
I've seen it, and I used to see that. I've been in front of a lot of boards over the years, and for a lot, you would get just kind of, just tell me everything is okay.
That's right.
And they kind of look at your body language, and they say, okay, either he's really telling me it's okay, or I don't believe him, kind of thing. But now I think boards are asking much better questions, whether they're being coached outside, or whether boards are actually changing the composition of the boards. I know in our case there was a deliberate attempt to change out a couple of key board members to bring in much deeper kind of technical knowledge. And in fact, in one case, I hadn't met that board member. I was in front of the board, and before I knew it, I was getting questions on chain of custody and rules of evidence. And it's like, whoa, a great addition to the team. So. What I'm finding now that's enlightening is I've been asked by board members, what should I really be asking? And I would tell them, think about the margins. Think about, you may want to ask a corporate security officer, tell me about your budget this year, and tell me about the project that just fell below the line, right? Start to probe around the margins. Not what are the cool things you're doing, because you'll get lost in all this gibberish about the cool things. You got to get past that and kind of probe at the margins, the risk-based decisions that the security officers are making. And so I think there's a line of questioning, I like to say, around the margins, where if you poke at what is the thing that didn't make it. I think you find a very interesting conversation why it didn't make it. It wasn't sexy, or it was too expensive, and those are probably the wrong reasons to be making a call. And just one more point. So I talked about my kind of 2 priorities in my first year. One is get really focused on our ability to detect and respond and invest disproportionately in that area. But the second thing is really getting a working understanding of what matters most to the company. So, we went through a pretty rigid process of what I call the high value asset analysis, but really understanding all of the key business processes, all of the key assets, weighting those without making it an overly academic exercise, but enough to say, hey, we know what the top 20 critical business processes, critical applications are to the business. Let's go ahead and focus there, make sure we have appropriate coverage to protect those assets, make sure we're comfortable accepting the risk in those other areas, and then as resources become available and over time, we'll start to shift to some of those, middle risk and lower risk assets. But you've got to focus on what matters most to the company and put your limited resources there first.
And so if I'm a CFO and you come in with a budget, how do I know if it's a big budget, a little budget, medium-sized budget? How, do you aim for a particular percentage of your IT spend, or how do you think about it?
No, we really, I think what helps is to cast it in terms of business risk. So you take the example I just gave. So I have a chart that I just used last week, as a matter of fact, that I identified those high value assets, and then for each high value asset, identify what a set of minimum security requirements are across those assets, and then I was able to show them in a simple graph that of these top 20 critical assets, you've only got 55% coverage, in terms of the minimum security requirements. That they got, right, because they connected the business risk. And I said, whoa, what's it going to take to get that coverage, back up to, 100%? Now I can talk budget. I said, look, I've got to make an investment here to get those up to 100% coverage. Now they're thinking about it in terms of the risk to the business, and the dollars become a lot easier to defend and discuss because they're seeing it in business terms.
Right. Looking at business risk.
Yep.
There was a statistic maybe a year, 18 months ago, Dave, that 65% of big breaches had to be reported to corporations by the authorities. Is that still true?
I don't know if the exact number is true, but we do spend a lot of our time making victim notifications to companies, and pretty regularly it's the first time that the companies learn of the intrusion activity. I can't give you a statistic number, but I would say that sounds about on par.
That must be overwhelming for you.
We spend a lot of time doing victim notification, and that's a little bit problematic from us from a resource standpoint, because we're sending agents out to do those notifications, and those agents, their time could be much better spent either conducting investigations or doing other types of law enforcement or intelligence activity. Having said that, they're also, and hopefully I'm not confusing the issue too much, very important as well, because we're getting an opportunity to go out, introduce ourselves, provide some information of value to those companies, and then start to develop their relationships moving forward, so that we can do a better job of sharing information or intelligence on a much quicker in a much quicker time frame.
In general, do most companies spend a good amount of time developing relationships with the authorities? Is that your experience at Barclays, for instance?
Yes, absolutely. So actually, Michael, so you asked earlier how do we prioritize and how do we prioritize the spending? Yeah. So I think for an institution like ours, it's very much about tying into the business risk appetite. Mm-hmm. What is the maximum amount of money that you would be willing to lose in case of a successful breach? And there are a number of metrics that you can utilize to sort of do that, but it's very much tied to the financial risk metrics for us.
Do people use cyber insurance here? Does anybody believe in cyber insurance? You do? I was on a panel the other day, asked that question, and I got 3 people who said it's a waste of money.
Yeah, it's just a risk mitigation strategy. I know for an organization like ours, with the complexity and the scale, we're constantly working through investigations, and there comes a time where you're going to bring in third-party resources. And cyber insurance has actually been a help to offset that risk. So, I know there's questions about not all organizations have had success with that.
Well, it's the old story. It gives you the opportunity to sue somebody rather than get money.
We thought about that. We've been thinking about this for years and years as a business model. It never was something that really bubbled up in terms of customer demand at scale. It's often just sort of, well, I'll be self-insured. If something goes wrong, it's, for example, fraud at a bank is a certain percentage of revenue, and if something goes wrong, it's sort of on them. So I think the issue now you're going to have with insurance companies is a catastrophic event like a Sony, where you go, hey, hold on a second, who's going to insure that? So
I mean,
I'm not sure. If I was in the security industry, I wouldn't be pursuing that.
So I've heard different estimates, but I think less than 1% of cyber losses are insured. And frankly, if you're an insurance company, if you don't understand frequency or severity, why would you bother writing a policy? I mean,
it's the only industry. The fascinating thing about security here is it's the only industry where you have an active opponent.
Yeah.
Where you think about the guy that makes the Dyson vacuum cleaner. It's like, well, physics aren't going to change. You figure out how to get that thing spinning, and boom, you got a product, right? In the security industry, it's totally different because you build them. And I think this is something that folks don't really comprehend the effect this has on the dynamics of the industry, which is, yes, once you make your product secure, it is secure for today until the bad guys figure out a way to change the game on you. And and that's one of the key differences that I think when you go in front of your board, it's sort of hard to really understand. Are we good? It's like, well, we're good right now, but that's not to say we're going to be good tomorrow or in 5 minutes from now.
I have a couple of other questions I want to ask, but I did want to open it up. We got 10 or 15 minutes to anybody in the audience that had a question. Wow.
So if I could just offer an anecdote on what we've been talking about in terms of raising consciousness at the board level. I mean, my own view from where I sit is that I think there's certainly more that could be done there, but I think it has raised a lot. And I think it's really kind of extraordinary if you think back sort of 5 to 7 years, how much it was not on the consciousness of the C-suite, not on the consciousness of the board at all. When I was at the White House, I had a company, a biotech company. Their senior execs came to see me, and they came in to say, we're thinking about moving some of our research and our operations to China. We're hearing, that there may be a security threat that we need to think about, that economic espionage might be a concern, but it seems really expensive to deal with. And just, can you just tell us that we're going to be fine and we don't need to worry about this? And, I sat there thinking, I'm not sure whether to laugh or cry. This is the most extraordinary conversation. And I think variations of that, we're hearing there's a threat, but it's really expensive. We don't know what to do. Where a lot of companies, even sophisticated companies, were 5 or 7 years ago. I do think companies, at least in my experience, have kind of moved beyond that. They may not be sure exactly what the right steps are, but I think a lot of companies have realized that this is something where it's worth investing the money. This is not a theoretical threat. And it is a conversation that is now happening at the most senior levels of the company, and I think that's a positive step forward.
Good.
I think we're seeing companies be more proactive. You mentioned life sciences, and right now, actually, we have a number of clients that are in the life sciences area, and you think about, a breach. Well, medical research data, especially with genetic information, is a big area to protect right now. So I think you're right, whereas 5 to 7 years ago, they were just starting to think about it. Now they're actually building it into their business models, into their business plans, and investing heavily right up front. We see the same in alternative energy right now, where they're getting ahead of it. Instead of waiting till it's too late, they're investing up front and putting in good cyber defense. So I think we have seen a real shift, and I think it largely is because the board of directors is now asking the right questions and being much more proactive.
Elena?
Yes, I think it's definitely there's a huge shift, and it's not only in the perception, but it's also in the action. So for large enterprises, cyber risk has now been included in the enterprise risk management as a core enterprise risk, so along with market conditions such as global economic risks. And financial services industry, for instance, is one of the most regulated. So for us, the regulators is also a huge driver for being secure. On the one hand, companies can be fined for negligence, for not doing enough. On the other hand, regulators are also strong partners in driving those security demands. And they're definitely very interested in every aspect of security on every level. So that's definitely a huge driver for healthcare industry, financial services, and other regulated companies.
Do you think a lot of these security needs and requirements imposed by regulators are actually going to make it very difficult for smaller companies? I mean, I know a number of companies, investment companies in the financial world that actually will say, all these regulations are going to put us out of business. The only guys that are going to be left over are going to be the big banks. Bang. Maybe the same is true of pharmaceutical companies. Maybe the same is true of technology companies, software companies. Does anybody worry about that, and maybe the effect on innovation?
Yeah, I worry about it from two aspects. Well, yeah, one, I think there is an economic disadvantage component of that, particularly for small companies that just can't compete to get through all the regulatory scrutiny. But you know, the other thing that I've seen in countless organizations is you start to get so fixated on compliance, and compliance is fundamentally minimum standard as far as I'm concerned, and they get fixated on that at the expense of real security. So that you become a box checking exercise, and they congratulate themselves that they got through a PCI or a HIPAA certification, and they've got miserable security. Right. So how do we get people like that to reverse the model and think about what's the kind of robust, comprehensive security program? If you implement and execute a program like that, then compliance just drops out as a natural byproduct.
Yeah. Somebody?
Generally, I think it's lagging so far behind at this point. I would agree with your point that it's people checking boxes, and in fact delivers sort of net effective less security than you would have had if you just did the right thing. Sort of just a general perspective, but I also think the importance is going up at this point. So, when Secretary Pritzker is thinking, and Madam Pritzker is thinking about what do we go do next, I think this is a key area for us to innovate in. If you look at the kind of the big two epochs that have happened in security, or at least the way I think about it is kind of at computer security started off with nuisances, right? Like, oh, a hack happened, something nuisance, sort of a nuisance, an email or something happens or your computer crashes, to economic threat as we disrupted e-commerce. So now clearly, economic threat and embarrassment like what you see with big companies happening. But now you're moving into real physical damage as the Internet of Things starts to take hold, and we saw that previewed by Stuxnet and so on. So you really start to need to take this more seriously and a more thoughtful and measured approach across government and private sector. And so it's not anymore the kind of a thing that we can just sort of haphazardly do when lives are at stake. It's not just some executives getting embarrassed or money being lost or a nuisance. It's real physical damage and bodily harm. So I think it's taking on a new order of magnitude in terms of the importance and how we think about it.
I knew you had a comment.
Right. So today, actually, cybersecurity industry is about a $75 billion industry, and it's expected to grow significantly in probably $220 billion industry in less than 4 years. So of course, it's very expensive for both small companies and large companies to maintain security teams, but also to buy appropriate security solutions. So I think for smaller companies, what they could potentially consider is outsourcing their security functions. And that ties very well into also regulatory debates. Right now, one of the most debated issues is third-party risk, and how can you ensure that your providers and suppliers are actually complying with all the regulations. But also in the matter of regulatory compliance, I think also regulators are kind of shifting their perception as well. So in the UK, for instance, last year, the rules were significantly simplified, and now it's much easier to set up even a bank or financial institutions, and you can do it basically within a couple of months, which was never possible before. And they're also very conscious of the fact that they don't want to slow down the innovation, but they actually want to help. Right. So I think it's important to also partner with them as well.
One other initiative that I think we're making progress. I think we've got to continue to work at it pretty aggressively, and that's all around information sharing. Probably a lot of the audience is familiar with the information sharing analysis centers that have been around for 15 years or so, coming out of President Clinton's presidential decision directive. We've had mixed success with ISACs. They got off to a very slow start. Over the years, everybody was trying to consume the information. Nobody wanted to share anything. Right. They would have to kind of stuff the system with just bogus stuff just to have some content in there. Right. And we didn't make a lot of progress. I mean, some of the ISACs, financial services being one, Department of Defense ISAC, have made a lot of progress in the last few years. The cloud service providers, we meet together. We've just finished our third meeting a few weeks ago. So we get 10 or 15 of us in a room, and we said, look, from a cloud perspective, it's not any one cloud; it's an ecosystem of clouds. So we need to be one security team across all the cloud providers, and so we're working in interest of that will help all of us kind of mutually. And one of those is information sharing, which actually came out as a #1 initiative that all the CSPs wanted to address together. And our concept on the information sharing is like, I'm not interested in it if it's a few days old. What I want to do is, if I experience an attack tonight, I want to be able to characterize that in as much detail as possible and get that on the wire to the other cloud service providers in a matter of minutes, if not hours. Now, obviously, there was some resistance to that. Are there liabilities with potentially exposing customers and things like that? So, we work through that with kind of an underlying technology that allows us to anonymize that data, gives us anonymous chat feature and so forth. So now we can actually move data very quickly. So if I see something, I've got one of my analysts, one of his primary functions is to characterize that, get that into the system, and get that out to the cloud service providers. We always talk about the bad. If we could just share half as good as the bad guys, we'd be so much better off. The underground economy right now for selling exploits and malware is huge. I mean, I think there's some reports recently. Rand had a report, as well as some others, that I don't know where they got these numbers, but it was interesting enough to me anyway. They said some of these people that work in that underground economy selling these exploits and everything are making about $80,000 a month. It's not a bad business. They're not going away, and so there's an entire market there. Yet, as companies, we don't share. Right? We have a problem. Don't tell anybody we had a problem. I think we got to get comfortable with ourselves and say, hey, wait a minute. We've got a broader obligation to the community, and so we need to be sharing. Now, we'll take protective measures so that we don't cross that line and potentially expose customers and everything. But we've got to do everything in our power to share information more effectively, more frequently, certainly a lot faster than we've been doing today.
Kind of reminds me of like back in the Western days when some robbers came into town, and so does everybody. It sounds like we're all running around talking about improving the door locks. Like, hey, where the houses are getting robbed, we should fix the door locks. Well, like, where's the posse? Like, round up the posse and go get the bad guys. Kind of speaking to what you say, and back actually previously, Victoria, to what you had said earlier around, cross-country extradition and all of these issues. It's like there are real people behind these things. In some cases, state-sponsored, but in some cases not. And that's another part of the dialogue that needs to be really increased, because it's we can talk about better door locks until we're blue in the face, but at the end of the day, it's people behind these attacks, and we need to be locking those people up, in my opinion.
Well, I think we should close there. I want to thank the panel. I actually got a little bit more optimistic during this discussion. Dave, so back to my first question, the good guys or the bad guys winning? I think I can see the meter moving in the right direction. But thank you very much.